Does it feel like deja vu? For a lot of people, right now feels like 2008 all over again. We've just got a banking crisis. And in fact, my friend Mark was at the bank on Monday and called me and he said there was a line out the door of people looking to withdraw their deposits. So is this 2008 all over again? Is this going to impact our economy? How do we respond? And more importantly, what do we watch for? Now, before we get started, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of people with narratives. They want to drive fear so that they can drive viewership, or they want to sell you something like a precious metal, whatever the case may be. Doesn't matter. We're not taking that approach. We're just taking a sober look at what the challenge is and how we should respond. How do we navigate this? Now, recognize though, there is one fundamental difference. 2008, we had a systemic issue. And so when Lehman Brothers collapsed, it exposed the weakness in that systemic issue. That systemic pervasive issue was real estate. Now, don't get me wrong, real estate can be a great investment, but real estate has a unique challenge. When things go bad, it becomes illiquid. And what we saw with the financial institutions had an excessive exposure to real estate. And so the tumbling triggering effect meant that real estate values were dropping. And because real estate does become illiquid, it becomes difficult to access capital when you need so. And so literally in many cases, you're forced into this difficult decision of, do you liquidate probably at a loss to meet the capital needs? And so we had a snowball effect. Is our issue today systemic? Well, first, before we do, let's remember that the United States, as well as many countries like EU, UK, etc., deposits are protected up to some level. The United States is 250,000, meaning for the average person, really you're protected. But there are needs periodically for excess deposits. Let's say a business where you need to keep a larger amount of money on hand to cover payroll, etc., other expenses. Now, at least in the United States, there are alternative ways to insure and protect those assets if you're astute enough to use them. But let's really look at what's happened and what is the impact for us and for the economy. Now, we have had 3 banks fold and taken over by the government in a very short period of time. Now, the first was really related. They were heavily involved in the crypto industry, lots of deposits. The turmoil there drove people to, out of a sense of security, withdraw deposits, put strain on them. And what that did is that created a small ripple effect. Now, ultimately, the bigger issue of the 3 banks is Silicon Valley Bank, also known as SVB. And so what happened was SVB has a very unique niche. And one of the reasons why this has created so much concern is they are the 16th largest bank in the United States. So it's created this fear. But SVB had a couple of unique challenges, and one of which was their extreme exposure to the tech industry, to the Silicon Valley startup arena. And they had policies really designed around that sector. So they had this extreme exposure. And when there was a little bit of concern, what we saw was savvy, astute tech executives withdrawing large amounts of money, large deposits to protect themselves. Now, to give you an idea, this is not just for payroll, expansion plans, etc. We're literally watching billions of dollars being withdrawn, which would create stress on any financial institution. But then there was another contributing factor, and this is the one that I want us to be the most aware of, and that's this. So, at least in America, banks are typically required to keep some portion of deposits in conservative investments, thereby backing up those deposits. But the challenge is those conservative investments can lose money in the short term, especially in a rising interest rate environment, which we have seen to the extreme. Now, we won't take the time to go into it, but we will next week post a video in the God-Powered app where we will break down how rising and softening interest rates impact conservative investments. But here's the issue. Longer-term conservative investments are impacted to a greater degree. So in rising rates, what that means is they are hit much harder. And for some reason, Silicon Valley Bank had a larger exposure to longer term conservative investments. And so when they went to liquidate to meet the needs of these withdrawals, they took a $1.8 billion loss. Now, when word of that hit the street, literally the dam burst, and ultimately the government had to step in and take them over. So what does this mean for you and I? Well, first off, is this a systemic issue? Well, two points to that. One is, I do expect periodic volatility and greater scrutiny on other financial institutions. But will this directly impact the economy? In general, no. Now, it will impact the tech industry to a degree because SVB had policies that were very beneficial to them. It will be difficult for them to replace that relationship. But ultimately, it really doesn't have the profound impact on the economy that Lehman Brothers collapse did. And in fact, the greater scrutiny on financial institutions should have the effect longer term of creating a healthier system. But what it does do is highlight the challenge of this tenacious inflation we're facing right now. Now, inflation's always a bit difficult to deal with, but on top of all the other factors driving inflation, we are exacerbated. Contributing to that is social and political agendas that are really helping to drive that inflation. So what we see is governments battling to rein in inflation, typically by raising interest rates. Now, the challenge is they have done so aggressively, and this inflation is absolutely tenacious. It is very difficult to deal with. So the dilemma becomes for these agencies whose mandate is to rein in inflation. The issue becomes, do they continue to raise rates aggressively in this battle to rein in inflation, or do they slow things down just a bit, taking a bit of pressure off of certain institutions, but in the process of doing so, potentially allow the inflation to gain deeper roots into the system, making it even more difficult to deal with? Obviously, none of these are easy answers, but what it does say to you and I, and especially if we lead organizations, to be aware of, to be watchful of the impact of this pervasive inflation, the impact of rising rates. We obviously can't just relax. We need to be aware and use wisdom on how to navigate this system. So, do I expect the banking system to collapse? No. Will we have periodic volatility? Absolutely. But more importantly, we need to use wisdom on how to navigate this inflationary environment.